Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, welcome to Communication in Crisis. My name's Kylie Worry, author, speaker and trainer. Today we're speaking about how to cope when you've been traumatised by a crisis. I call this the wound, and today we'll be focusing on how that wound affects the powerful and the patient communicator in a crisis. So again, we talk about poor communication. This is what causes the crisis in the first place, or it's the result of a crisis. What you would actually find is that most of us, when something goes wrong, when we're impacted in some way, we tend to become very poor communicators. It takes someone who is extremely self-aware to realise what's happening and actually improve their communication whilst going through a crisis. And so that's what I want for you guys from this series, is to learn when you're actually going through a crisis and to know what your individual responses are, and then to know what you can do to ensure that your communication stays clear and stays effective during that crisis. So poor communication affects us all at some point. Now, I'd like you to think about a time when you've actually experienced poor communication. Maybe it was as a customer in a business, and you, for example, let's talk about a bank. All of us have gone into banks, and most of us will be rushing in there in our lunch hour to try and get that bank check or whatever we've got to do if we have to go in. And we can stand in line for ages and see people behind the counter not even making eye contact, not looking at us, and just they won't provide that service that we need. And then when you finally get to the counter and get that service, they look at you like you're actually impeding on their time, that you are a pain and that they don't want to serve you. Now, most of us have experienced that at least once or twice, and I know that every time I go into certain retailers these days as well, that you can actually feel like, as a customer, you're actually a pain, which is certainly not what we should be feeling. So poor communication can affect us all, and if you're in business, you want to make sure that your communication from yourself and from anyone who's part of your team is clear, is concise, and is exactly doing the job that it needs to do so that your business can hit all the goals that you've got set for it. Now, if you're not doing well in your communication, you can be losing up to 32% of your profit. Now, if you've got a toxic workplace, if you've got a team that's not functioning very well, then you're probably going to be losing even more of your profit. And you work so hard to get that profit, you don't want to give it away for no reason. The other part of poor communication that can really affect you as a person in business or someone who's working in a team is when people don't know how to deal with relational tension in the workplace. When there's a problem with someone and people try and deal with it, but they don't know what to do. They don't understand how the other person's responding. They get all stressed and emotional, and before you know it, you're both in crisis and one of you decides what's easier to leave. Now, you can lose some really good staff when that happens, and we want to prevent that. So what we want to do is help each of the people in your business, in your team, in your circle, become courageous communicators. Someone who is willing to say what needs to be said. Someone who's willing to put up their hand and say, hey, there's a problem here, and let's work through it together. When you do that, you'll go from poor communication to really clear and effective communication. So we've had a crisis, there's been an impact. Now what happens is that we're wounded. And in terms of communication, in terms of relationships, what we feel is emotional pain. Now, normally when we feel emotional pain, most of us do anything to make that pain go away. And it's normally not a helpful decision. For example, sometimes when people are going through stressful times or struggling with emotions, they might start to drink a little bit more because they want to numb that pain. Some people will avoid the problem at all costs and, maybe go out and spend more time with their friends and do anything just to get their mind off the problem. But what we really need to be doing is actually dealing with the problem. Because emotions are really, I've heard it explained before, as energy in motion, and we need to manage our emotions. Emotions, we assign things like, that's a good emotion, that's a bad emotion, that's a nice emotion, that's a painful emotion. But emotions themselves are really just something that we experience, and we assign the value to it. The most important thing you can do with an emotion is acknowledge that you're having it. Because when you don't acknowledge it, when you try and push it down and pretend that it doesn't exist, it actually grows. And that causes us all sorts of issues. It was something that I saw all the time when I was running that anger management class many, many years ago. These people had squashed down their anger until all they were was angry. And it didn't help anybody. So we're talking about this cycle of offence, and it happens to all of us. There are times when things go wrong and you feel offended, you might get hurt, you might have felt ignored. Maybe you've been working really hard in a job and you thought that there was a recognition coming for you and you didn't get that recognition. And all of a sudden you're taking it really, really personally, when maybe something else is going on. What you need to do is catch yourself in that cycle and catch yourself before it goes out of control and do something helpful about it. Perhaps go up to the person and have a conversation. Ask them what actually happened with the promotion. Ask them why you were overlooked. And just have an open and honest conversation about it. That's a much healthier way than allowing that cycle of offence to go all the way up to resentment, where you can be stuck, and no one wants to be stuck with a feeling of resentment. It's a very unhealthy place to be. So the idea is that I'm giving you a roadmap to better communication. What I want for you guys is to understand yourself in a way that means that you can understand what your strengths are as a communicator, that you can understand what value you bring to your role, whether it's in business or in the family or in a relationship. But once you understand yourself, the goal, taking it further, is to then understand others in a new way. When we're in a relationship, it's a two-way street. And we give, but we also take. And it's the same for the other person. And what's really important is for you to understand the motivations behind someone else's behaviour, to not read into it too much and take things the wrong way, and to ensure that you understand rather than assume. The moment that you find yourself assuming in communication, you are in a very dangerous place. It means you're guessing, it means you really don't know what you're doing, and it can end you up very much in the wrong place from where you're actually aiming to go. Once you understand yourself and you can begin to understand others and their motivations and why they do what they do, you can then become a courageous communicator, someone who can communicate with intention. Now, when I say intention, it's about communicating with care and with purpose. It's being able to look at a situation where things might be all going crazy and going, if I do this, it's actually going to help the situation. I know if I do this, it's actually going to make things worse. We want to be contributing positively so that all of us can get through the crisis with the littlest amount of damage possible. So you need that roadmap to being a better communicator. So today we're talking about the second phase of the Courageous Intentions model, and that is step 2, you've been wounded. Now, we've looked at how impact affects all 4 styles, and today we're looking at the powerful and the patient communicator and how they respond when they've been wounded. And I want you to notice just how different it is, because remember, these guys are complete opposites. The powerful communicator, very driven and direct and pushy, and the patient communicator, completely opposite, very quiet, very reserved, and doesn't really show their emotions. So let's face it, we've been wounded. Now, wounds can hurt. That's why it's called a wound. And normally what we do when we've been hurt is we do something to fix it. Now, it's interesting that in relationships and in communication especially, we actually don't take the time to learn how we can help ourselves in this phase of being wounded. And without even trying, we can be doing things that actually make the wound worse. The longer that you stay wounded, the longer that you stay in that really unhelpful cycle, the wound just gets bigger and worse and uglier, and it's harder to fix. You think about those people that you've met that are stuck back in a place of offence that may have happened 20 or 30 years ago. We've all had someone like that in our world that just gets stuck in that place, and they can't talk about anything else but about how hurt they are and how much they've lost and how angry they are and how dare this happen to them. Now, all of us could get caught in that place. What you need to do is understand what you're like when you're wounded and what you can do to get out of that cycle as quickly as possible. So let's look at our communication DNA again. Now we've got these 4 styles that most of us have at least one dominant style. Sometimes we're a combination. I shared in the first episode that I'm a powerful perfectionist. They're my 2 dominant styles. So for me, I want things done yesterday and perfectly. Thank you very much. Now my husband is the complete opposite to me. He's a playful and patient communicator. So together we cover all 4 parts of this DNA model, and it means that together we actually can work really collaboratively and use our strengths to actually make the most of every situation. We can see things from all perspectives when we're working together, which is really great. What you'll probably notice as well is that in your relationships that you tend to end up being with someone who's opposite to you. So if you're powerful, you probably end up with a patient communicator. If you're playful, you probably end up with a perfectionist communicator. It's just the way the world works. And you'll also find that in your friendships that you also tend to associate with people that are different from us. And it's a great way to make sure that all of our strengths are covered. There's no one style that's more valuable than another, and each of us brings something really unique and really special to relationships and to the workplace. So today we'll talk about the powerful communicator and them being wounded. Now remember these guys. They can come across as quite aggressive and competitive, but they don't see themselves that way. They think everyone else is the same as them. They speak fast, they speak in bullet points, they're very black and white. They can be described very much as being it's their way or the highway. And they strive to get what they want. Now, they don't see there's anything wrong with that because most people aren't brave enough to say, hey, you're being really pushy. Most people let them get away with it. So they've got no idea the effect that they have on other people. So just remembering this communication style, we've got the famous example is Judge Judy. Now, these guys are direct, pushy, and aggressive. They want results, and they need control. Now, in a crisis, the very nature of crisis is to lose control. So these guys can really struggle in a crisis, and they'll do anything to get that control back. Now, it's interesting to notice what these guys are like when they're wounded. This picture says it all. They feel angry. They can yell even more. They can get more pushy. They can be like that. We talked about the impact and how they can erupt like a volcano. Well, a wounded, powerful communicator is just yelling and screaming at everything, trying to get back that control. And they really don't realise the negative effect that they're having on themselves and on other people around them. Now, you may want to be backing away from someone like this as quickly as possible, but don't worry, they will follow you. You need to deal with the fact that they've been wounded and allow them to express what's happened so that they can move forward through that emotion. But there's another way that the powerful communicator can respond in crisis, and they can become like a superhero. Because these guys are so independent already, because these guys are the sort of person that solves all of the problems on
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.